Roll Tide and welcome to TideTV This Week. I'm Roger Hoover, joined by Kira Goldstein. And Kira, great win for Alabama against Ole Miss, 5-0 now on the season.
Yeah, an incredible game and a very dominating performance from the Crimson Tide, especially on defense.
Well, you have to consider the Rebels ranked in the top 10 in the nation in 5 offensive categories, including ranking number 1 in the nation in scoring offense and total offense. Ole Miss averaged over 52 points and 635 yards per game going into Saturday's showdown with the Tide.
Alabama held the high-powered Rebels offense scoreless and allowed just 109 total yards in the first half. The Rebels averaged almost 300 rushing yards per game, but the Tide held them to just 17 yards on 19 carries in that dominating first half performance. The Alabama defense didn't allow any points until midway through the third quarter, and with the Tide up 42-7, Ole Miss scored 2 late touchdowns, but the Tide doubled up Lane Kiffin and the 12th-ranked Rebels 42-21.
What a performance by the Crimson Tide on offense and defense, and also an awesome performance by the fans as well, as Bryant Denny was really rocking on Saturday.
Yeah, what a great atmosphere it was for the Tide's big win. Let's take an all-access look at Alabama's 42-21 win over Ole Miss.
The Crimson Tide of Alabama, the defending national champions, ranked number 1 as they always seem to be, and off to a 4-0 start. Here we go.
Running back, Ely finds an opening, gets stacked up. I don't think he got there. I don't believe he made it.
Million time steps up in the pocket, fires to the end zone. Touchdown, John Mechie. Corral's trying to get to the first down marker and won't. Brian Robinson dragging would-be tacklers for about 16 yards.
Ole Miss, here's the give to B-Rob, and he'll just run over people and carry people and take them all down.
Corral scans the field. Flushed. Sanders giving chase, throws late and out of bounds. Alabama takes over. Blitz coming. Corral going down. Will Anderson has time, running out of time. Down he goes. No, he got away. Young to the goal line. He gets the call. He gets the touchdown. Alabama. Robinson again. This time he's in for the second time today. Brian Robinson has carried the mail into the end zone 3 times today. Make it 4. Touchdown, Alabama.
I'ma call that Toby. Got a bag in that she's soaking. Pop his ass with the now we floating. I put a pack in the flag.
Pitch. Ely trying to get through. The tackler in toe-to-toe says, Alabama with a stop again. Play fake. Throw to the end zone. Wide open. Latu touchdown, Alabama. Fumble. Ball is loose. Scooped up by Alabama. It's Justin Iborgby.
Damn, cut though. Don't love her, I just wanna cut though. Can't hang around me, you got no though. I'm in the trap with my motor. I see fashion in Florida, yeah. Punch in the coupe, I turn that bitch to a Lolo. Sipping on slow-mo, yeah.
In the dominating win over the 12th-ranked Ole Miss Rebels, the number 1-ranked Crimson Tide received several Southeastern Conference and national honors.
Alabama had both the SEC Defensive and Offensive Players of the Week.
As running back Brian Robinson Jr. was named the Southeastern Conference Co-Offensive Player of the Week, Robinson rushed for 171 yards on a career-high 36 attempts with 4 touchdowns. Robinson was also named the Maxwell Award National Player of the Week, the Walter Camp Player of the Week, and the Reese's Senior Bowl Offensive Player of the Week.
And defensive end Will Anderson Jr. was selected as the SEC Co-Defensive Player of the Week. The Terminator recorded a career-best 9 total tackles, including 2.5 for a loss with 1 sack. Anderson also added 2 quarterback hurries. Anderson was also named the Bednarik National Player of the Week by the Maxwell Football Club.
Coach Saban and the coaching staff revealed their Players of the Week for the Ole Miss game. This week, 12 players were selected, including the entire offensive line, along with running back Brian Robinson Jr., Alabama's starting five of Evan Neal, Javion Cohen, Darian Dalcourt, Emil Ekiyor Jr., and Chris Owens, along with hybrid tight end offensive lineman Kendall Randolph, were selected. The offensive line helped provide holes for the Tide to rack up 210 yards rushing. The line also provided adequate protection for quarterback Bryce Young to complete 20 of 26 passes for 241 yards.
4 were selected on defense, along with Will Anderson Jr., Jordan Battle, and DeMarco Helms and Phil Mathis were selected. Battle totaled 9 tackles and was a huge part of a couple of fourth down stops. Helms had a team-high 11 tackles and totaled 4 key third down stops to help force 2 punts and a pair of turnovers on downs. And Phil Mathis totaled 3 tackles with a sack and a forced fumble.
And over on special teams, Jalen Moody made a big stop on kickoff coverage that limited the Rebels to a 22-yard return that eventually led to a turnover for the Tide. The kickoff time for next week's matchup with Mississippi State in Starkville was announced this week. It will be the second night game in a row for the Crimson Tide, as Alabama and Mississippi State will kick off at 6 p.m. The game will be broadcast on ESPN.
You know, another big week for the Tide in the NFL, another big week for a couple of Alabama rookies. Let's take a look at this week's Crimson Tide in the NFL Players of the Week.
Jalen Hurts completed 32 of 48 passes for 387 yards with 2 touchdowns. Hurts also added 47 yards rushing in the Eagles game against the Kansas City Chiefs. And Devontae Smith was on the receiving end of 122 of those passing yards from Jalen Hurts. Smitty finished with 7 receptions on 10 targets for 122 yards.
And Mac Jones didn't back down from the spotlight in the Patriots' highly anticipated matchup with Tom Brady and the defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jones completed 31 of 40 passes for 275 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also, Derrick Henry rushed for 157 yards on 33 carries with 1 touchdown for the Tennessee Titans in their matchup against the New York Jets. Henry currently leads the NFL in rushing with 510 yards and 4 touchdowns.
And on defense, Trayvon Diggs continued his amazing start to the season for the Dallas Cowboys. Going into the Cowboys matchup against the Carolina Panthers, Diggs had intercepted a pass in every single game this season. Well, he won up that this past Sunday as he intercepted not 1 but 2 passes. Diggs currently leads the NFL in interceptions with 5. He was named the NFC Defensive Player of the Week. And those were our Crimson Tide in the NFL Players of the Week. Some incredible performances this week from our former Crimson Tide players.
Yes, it was a big week for the Crimson Tide in the NFL once again. It's also going to be a big week for the Crimson Tide this year as Alabama travels to College Station to take on the Texas A&M Aggies. We'll have a full preview of the matchup coming up next.
Tide TV This Week is presented by the University of Alabama, where legends are made.
Welcome back to Tide TV This Week. What a great game it was this past Saturday in Bryant-Denny Stadium as the Tide rolled over the Ole Miss Rebels 42-21. Now this weekend, Alabama continues SEC play against the Aggies of Texas A&M.
For a preview of this weekend's matchup between the Tide and the Aggies, our Christopher England joins us now.
After a dominating victory over number 12 Ole Miss this past weekend, the number 1 ranked Crimson Tide have another big SEC West matchup this weekend, but this time it's on the road in College Station as Alabama travels to take on Texas A&M at Kyle Field. It will be only the 14th matchup between the two schools, with Alabama holding an 11-2 advantage all time, including last season's 52-24 win in Tuscaloosa. To preview this weekend's matchup, I'm joined once again by former NFL and Crimson Tide quarterback John Parker Wilson. JP, what a dominating performance this past weekend for the Crimson Tide over Lane Kiffin and that high-powered Ole Miss offense.
No question about it. I thought it was a great game all around for Alabama offense, defense, special teams. I mean, obviously the defense came up big and a very complicated, sophisticated Lane Kiffin offense. I think they played really well all day long, stopping Ole Miss early in the game down there in our own red zone territory, and able to just continue it on. I thought Bryce played really well, but none better than Brian Robinson. Career day for him, rushing the ball, the guys up front of the offensive line, really just set the tone early, and we're able to continue that all afternoon long.
Well, this weekend, Alabama takes on Texas A&M. Going into the season, most experts reporting to this matchup as being the one that could give Alabama the most trouble. The Aggies were ranked 6th to start the season and were ranked as high as 5th. But after a close win at Colorado and consecutive losses to Arkansas and Mississippi State, the Aggies are 3-2 and have dropped out of the top 25. What has happened to Texas A&M?
Yeah, it's been a tough year for Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies. 2 losses in a row. I don't think Jimbo's ever lost 3 consecutive conference game. So this is a big game for them. And be it on the road, we're going to a very hostile environment. I mean, Texas A&M is a very fun place to play when you're on the road. I think they've had some struggles. They've got some young guys, especially on offense, a lot of returning starters on defense, but inexperience on offense, especially up front on the offensive line. Running game's really good, though, so you got to expect A&M to bounce back.
On offense, the Aggies' most consistent player has been running back Isaiah Spiller. Spiller ranks 5th in the SEC, averaging over 90 yards per game and over 6 yards per carry. Despite Spiller's performance, Texas A&M ranks near the bottom in most offensive categories. After the way Alabama handled Ole Miss, do you see the Tide matching up pretty well against this Texas A&M offense?
Yeah, I think Alabama's defense has to just continue what they've been able to do in the past 2 games. I think looked really efficient, executed really well against Southern Miss, able to continue that against the high-powered offense at Ole Miss. And I think this week you got to be ready for the run and Spiller, but also tight end Jalen Wydermyer. We've seen him in the past. He's a very dynamic tight end, hasn't been involved that much in this Texas A&M offense. But you know what? Florida's tight ends had no catches coming into that game that we played them, and they ended up leading all receivers that game. So I would expect to see a lot of Spiller and a lot of the tight end.
Well, John Parker, after scoring 42 and holding Ole Miss to just 21 points, the Crimson Tide now lead the SEC in scoring offense at over 45 points per game. However, the Tide will be facing a pretty good Texas A&M defense. The Aggies ranked 2nd in the SEC in scoring defense, allowing less than 2 touchdowns per game at 12.6 points. How do you see the Crimson Tide offense matching up against this Aggies defense?
I think our offense is continuing to evolve, continuing to mature. I think Bryce is playing really well. I think him and Bill O'Brien are in really good sync right now. So we saw A&M give up over 200 yards rushing against Arkansas last week, over 400 yards passing against Mississippi State. So I think Alabama just continues to keep it balanced. Let Brian go. Let Roydell Williams get into the game now that Jace McClellan's going to be hurt. Maybe work Trey Sanders in, but also continue to press it downfield with both tight ends, Billingsley and Latu. Mechie and Jamison Williams, to me, have emerged also and continue to grow in their down-the-field ability. So just connecting on those down-the-field passes, creating more explosive plays. But we've just been so efficient, so methodical so far this year. So that's what Bryce's got to keep it going. It's just remaining cool, calm, and collected like he has been all year long.
JP, last week we talked about Coach Saban being 23-0 against his former assistants, and after the win against Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, Coach Saban is now an amazing 24-0 against former assistants. He now has the chance to make it 25-0 this weekend. Yeah,
it's still just even tough to think about that streak that he's been able to do, but just maintaining the discipline in the process, keeping his players involved. We got some injuries dealing with, especially running back coming back, so a lot of these guys to be focused, and a road trip's always tough. We know we're going to a really loud place in College Station, so we gotta get ready when we get down there. It's gonna be a late game, so a little later start than we're used to. So a lot of things with A&M trying to bounce back. So we know we get the target on our back. We just gotta go out and perform.
Thank you again for the insight, JP. I'm looking forward to another good one this weekend in College Station.
Roll Tide, looking forward to it.
Yes, sir, Roll Tide. Kickoff at Kyle Field between number 1 Alabama and Texas A&M is set for 7 p.m. It's the nightcap of a doubleheader on CBS. You can listen to John Parker Wilson, Eli Gold, Chris Stewart, Roger Hoover, and the rest of the Crimson Tide Sports Network crew online and on the radio beginning at 4 o'clock. Stay with us. We'll have more Tide TV this week coming up next.
Tide TV This Week is presented by Ford. For great offers on F-150, see your local Ford dealer. Proud sponsor of the Crimson Tide.
Welcome back to Tide TV This Week. I'm Keira Goldstein, joined by my co-host, Roger Hoover. Roger, the Alabama soccer team had a chance to even their SEC record on the season this past Thursday night at home against LSU.
To do so, it would take a great performance from the Tide because LSU entered the matchup 8-2, also ranked 24th in the nation. It was a scoreless first 84 minutes, but the Tide finally broke through. Macy Clem found Bella Scaturo on the flank of the 18-yard box, and then Scaturo found Reyna Reyes in the box off of a header. Reyes somehow bounced it right past the LSU goalkeeper for the score. Wow, as Reyes put just enough English on it to make it bounce right through the arms of the Tigers goalkeeper. That would be all as it would take. It's Alabama picking up the win over 24th ranked LSU, 1-0.
A big win for the Crimson Tide as Alabama improved to 7-6 overall and 2-2 in the season. And for her big play, Reyna Reyes was named the SEC Co-Offensive Player of the Week. Congratulations, Reyna.
Soccer season is in full swing, but it won't be long before basketball begins. The date was announced for the annual Tide tip-off this week. The Alabama men's and women's basketball team will hold their annual event on Friday, October 22nd in Foster Auditorium. It'll be the first year that the Tide tip-off event will be held in historic Foster Auditorium.
Doors for the event will open at 6:30 p.m. The on-court action begins at 7:30, and seating at the event will be first come, first serve with general admission seating. Capacity inside will be limited. However, there will be a large video board outside of Foster for those fans who do not make it in. If you can't make it, don't worry. The Tide tip-off event will be streamed live on SEC Network Plus.
Also, the Tide's first exhibition matchup was also announced this week. Alabama will host Louisiana for a charity exhibition matchup on October 24th. Proceeds will benefit the United Way of West Alabama. There will be no television or radio broadcast for the matchup. Tickets will be on sale soon and can be purchased on RollTide.com or by calling the ticket office at 205-348-BAMA.
Roger, we're not even to the midpoint of college football season, and we're already talking about basketball season starting. I am so excited. There's so much going on. I can't wait.
Yeah, me either, Kira. Both the men's and women's teams made it deep into the NCAA tournament last season. It's going to be exciting to see what they can do this year.
Stay with us. We'll visit with the Alabama men's tennis team coming up next, and we still have our plays and players of the week. That and more when TideTV This Week returns.
In a season of chaos.
You can tell they authentically play for each other.
Alabama does it. Absolute perfection.
How good can the Crimson Tide be again in 21?
It just doesn't show any sign of slowing down.
It's all about the process.
It's more than a buzz at Bryant-Denny.
This guy's not going anywhere. He doesn't just roll out great players. He and his staff develop them.
Bama's dominance shouldn't scare you. It should energize you.
Welcome back. The Alabama men's tennis team has played in a couple of tournaments already this season. The Tide hosted the Alabama 4 in the fall a couple of weeks ago, and this past weekend the Tide took part in the Bulldog Invitational in Starkville. Alabama captured 4 doubles and 8 singles victories over the 3-day event.
This week, members of the men's and women's tennis team will compete in the ITA All-American Championships in Charleston, South Carolina. For more on the men's tennis team and what we can expect from them this season, let's hear from head coach George Husick.
Expectations for this season are really to get better today than we were yesterday, and for tomorrow to get better tomorrow than we were today. It's really going to come down to how we practice, the focus that we have in practice, and that focus and mindset is going to be based around how we have our relationship with the coaches, how the players have a relationship with each other, and also how the players have a relationship with themselves individually. What are they bringing every day to practice? So we're all learning, we're all getting better, and that's the great thing about being here.
We've been working very hard since the summer. So what I can say is that we are very strong. So we're gonna do our best and good things are gonna happen. Roll Tide, let's go.
In a season of chaos.
You can tell they authentically play for each other.
Alabama does it. Absolute perfection.
How good can the Crimson Tide be again in 21?
It just doesn't show any sign of slowing down.
It's all about the process.
It's more than a buzz at Bryant-Denny.
This guy's not going anywhere. He doesn't just roll out great players. He and his staff develop them.
Bama's dominance shouldn't scare you. It should energize you.
Scaturo back to the center. Off a header and Swift lost control of it, and Alabama's in front.
Fourth in the yard, running back, finds an opening, gets stacked up. I don't believe he made it. 4th down and 1. Here's the toss outside. Bama's 2-0 toe. Got him. Going down. 1st and 10 Rebels. Quarterback under pressure. Hit as he throws. Intercepted. Malachi Moore then drops the ball. It's going to be a fumble, and it's going to be Alabama ball.
Those were our ATI Plays of the Week. Now let's take a look at our Players of the Week, brought to you by Legacy of Hope.
Mercy Shalengod finished in first place at the Joe Payne Invitational in South Bend, Indiana. It was the 4th consecutive victory for the defending NCAA champion. Shalengod was also named the SEC and the NCAA Division I Women's National Athlete of the Week. Her performance helped the women move up the rankings to 4th in the nation, the highest ranking in program history.
Brian Robinson led the way for the Crimson Tide on offense with a career-high 171 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns. Robinson was named the SEC Co-Offensive Player of the Week. He was also named the Maxwell Award National Player of the Week, the Walter Kemp Player of the Week, and the Reese's Senior Bowl Offensive Player of the Week.
Will Anderson Jr. had a career-best 9 total tackles, including 2.5 for a loss with 1 sack, 2 quarterback hurries. Anderson was also named the SEC Co-Defensive Player of the Week and the Bednarik National Player of the Week by the Maxwell Football Club.
And fresh off her training with the Mexican national team, Reina Reyes scored the game-winning goal in Alabama's big upset win over 24th-ranked LSU. It was the second game-winning goal of the season for the junior and the 7th of her career. Congratulations to all of our Legacy of Hope Players of the Week.
And we invite you to tune in next week as we bring you more on the Crimson Tide and all-access content of Alabama you can't get anywhere else. See you next week, everyone. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
This has been a presentation from Learfield,